Hello, and welcome back to My Pop 5. In our show, we bring on guests to break down 5 pieces of pop culture that had an influence on them or helped shape them to become the creators and innovators that they are today. In today's show, we go behind the scenes and learn quite a bit more about one of our key players here at My Pop 5, Mr. Daniel Parra. Daniel's the co-creator and producer of this show. This show would not happen every week without him, and it was so awesome to get the chance to learn all about his influences and what inspired him to be who he is today. So, let's get into it. Here's our conversation with Daniel Parra. Hello, we are back with a very, very, very special episode today. We are doing something a little bit different. One of the things that's been important to me is finding incredible guests that are incredible artists, making music, films, books, podcasts, comedy that we feel very, very passionate about. And I also love our episodes where we get together as a My Pop 5 group and get together and talk about the things that we're loving at the moment. The request that I get most frequently, though, is learning a bit more about our people behind the scenes and people asking us, what is our Pop 5? If I had to have a Pop 5 for myself, what would it be? The rest being true for the rest of the gang as well. So today we have a person very near and dear to my heart, someone I love more than many other people in this world, Mr. Daniel Parra, the producer of the show. Daniel, thanks so much for joining as the first behind the scenes episode of My Pop 5. How are you, buddy?
Doing good. Nervous. Never had to talk about myself quite so much. I've been kind of going through the conversation in my head for for a couple of days now, but feeling good, man.
Yeah, Daniel is the, of course, phenomenal producer for My Pop 5. He's also a fantastic musician, guitar player, music producer, and he's really just been a really good friend of mine, helped me on various projects, whether it's engineering some of the vocals on the Jumpin' Jacob project that I've referred to in the show a couple times. He has his own tunes out there that he's done, and of course is the, co-creator of this show. So Daniel, it's been obviously a pleasure doing this with you and knowing you for all these years, but I'm excited to kind of get into your Pop 5. So, as always, you know the rundown. Without context, without comment, please tell us, what is your Pop 5?
All right. So my Pop 5 is The Iron Giants, Kingdom Hearts 2, Slipknot, specifically the album Iowa, Daft Punk's album Alive 2007, and OutKast's album ATLiens.
Yes. One of the things that I thought was interesting before we did this recording, Daniel, is I've even talked about with people who are coming on the show is they say it's so hard to pick just 5. And we thought about doing an episode like this back in season 1 with you, and you had chosen a My Pop 5 at that point. And then we had you do it again, and there was a lot of similarities and there were some differences. And I also think there were some shocking omissions, just me knowing you on both lists. And so I'm going to get into that here at some point. But how difficult was this for you? What were kind of some of the things that you were thinking as the first time having to craft a Pop 5 for yourself, knowing that we were going to be recording this and it would be locked in?
It's tough. I understand why. I think that's something that a lot of the guests say, oh no, like I kicked it around for a little bit. I wanted to put this, but I decided, everybody has their own logic for why they chose one thing over another, which I think is also really fun, to see how people interpret it. But yeah, it was difficult. Tried to go in order of chronologically, like the things that impacted me and in a chronological order. So, the Iron Giant was something I got into very young, OutKast being like the most recent thing. I was still a teenager getting into it, but everything kind of went in an order that way. So that's why I maybe left off some things, because I felt like, or some things that might have been on a previous list, is because I feel like one thing might have come before that and might have led me to that or to that particular album or other, piece of art. So at least that was kind of my philosophy here with the list, was like, what order did it go in? And, how can I kind of break it down to the roots of it all, I guess.
Totally. One thing that was interesting to me, not interesting because I know you, but I think a big takeaway was just how clearly impactful music has been at various different genres, right? Talking about, and we'll get into it in more depth, but, the variance between OutKast, Daft Punk, and Slipknot is pretty large, right, in terms of the difference. But obviously, it's clear that if you have 3 different musical artists here on your Pop 5, it's clear that music has a big importance on you. I know that you're a musician, and I know that you create music. So tell the audience a little bit of background about yourself. Where did you grow up? How did you get involved with music and loving music in the first place?
Yeah, this is cool to be able to kind of give my own background on the show. So I grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I was always interested in music. My dad is a drummer. Saw him perform a few times when he was still playing. I was very little. And then I started playing guitar around the age of like 10 or 11. So middle school, I guess. And then started playing guitar in the jazz band in 10th grade. And that was like a whole kind of turning point in the things that I was interested in and the community that I was involved in musically. So I went to NMSU, played in the jazz band for a couple years. I started out studying performance. I also studied music business. Never finished because I actually moved to Albuquerque, was an apprentice at a studio and learned audio production, recording, mixing, engineering, all of that. I've probably started like kind of working on just funny little recordings when I was in high school. Me and my friends used to like think it was really funny to like make songs or make like song parodies and stuff like that. Or if there was any time where in school I could do some kind of like project. Like I remember at one point, like my freshman year of college, taking a math course, and at the end of the year we had to kind of make this multimedia project. And I was in a class with like somebody who was like a graphic designer, and I made a sample based instrumental. We recorded the professor's lecture one day, and I kind of made like a little sample oriented instrumental off of that.
That's sick.
So yeah, it was pretty cool. I probably still have it somewhere. I'll have to show you that one day. But I started to kind of mess around with that, probably around that age, late high school, early college. And then that's when I went to do the apprenticeship at a studio. So yeah, that's probably, I still play guitar. I still mess around with recording. It's helpful because that's kind of how I know my way around the software that we use, for the podcast, and learn the equipment that we use to record. And, so it's kind of I think podcast is kind of the final evolution of, well, not the final evolution, but the most recent evolution of all of the interests that I've had in recording over the years. So I think it kind of ties in a way that I wasn't always expecting. I've been into podcasts, but not until fairly recently. So it was kind of made sense, and was something where I'd be listening to podcasts. I'd be like, that would probably be really fun to produce. So yeah, kind of the latest in my journey of being interested in recording.
Yeah, going back to music specifically, you mentioned learning guitar and your dad having that musical influence. Was it because of him that you wanted to play, or what kind of influenced you when you first were like, I want to play the guitar?
Not only was it my dad playing drums, I think, yes, at that point, I was like already amazed and interested in like playing live music. Also, my aunt and my older sister were in band. So I grew up in elementary school and middle school going to marching band competitions and going to their performances at, like local classical, like orchestral music performances and stuff like that. So I think that it was pretty easy for me. I always say that like I kind of had it easy because I don't think that there was ever a time in my life where I didn't want to be involved in music somehow. Like I think for everyone there's kind of this process that they have to go through to really find what they're interested in. But I've always been into music. Like my mom tells me that when I was a kid, I would like watch MTV all day, and I would like I was really into like Lenny Kravitz, American Woman. I was like really into that song, and I even remember that probably being like 3 or 4 years old. So yeah, I think just growing up with it in my family, I never really thought that I would be actually doing anything else. It's always been like, even now, like everything in my life kind of revolves around like, well, one day I want to get back to like playing music, or one day I want to get back to these projects. Like everything in my life has always kind of revolved around that. So yeah, I can't even say, I think just it was a big part of the people that I looked up to at that age.
That's amazing, man. Couple notes. First of all, I don't know if you saw it, but Lenny Kravitz at fucking 50 years old or however old he is now at the Grammys was still fucking slaying it, dude. He looked so good on stage. He sounded so good. And I'm like, he's still like just fucking, I'm like, he's a beautiful man. I don't know how to
Yeah.
explain it. Even at 50, he's still rocking, looks cool as hell. I'm like, dang, man, Lenny Kravitz killing it always. But one thing you
Yeah.
said that I think is interesting and kind of connects to both our connection and I think what leads into one of the first things I want to talk about here on your Pop 5 is how we met. You know, you mentioned the connection to marching band. I know you also played trumpet in marching band at various points and your family was there. But the first time we met each other actually has to do with marching band in some capacity. We were in the same room and I was talking to another person about the fact that I was in marching band at the university and I had been in a situation where I was talking about some various friends and you said, hey, I know some people that are in the music department over there at UNM. Do you know my friends Mark and Trey? And I'm like, those dudes are like my best friends. And you were like, what? Those dudes are like my best friends. And so we had this crazy connection just immediately in that instance of having that mutual connection. And then obviously got to getting to know each other. And then very quickly early on, even in the first getting to know each other, we started talking about like favorite musicians and favorite rappers. And then our love and affinity for Andre 3000 came up about that being our favorite rappers, which was pretty fucking awesome. So let's talk about OutKast. Let's talk about ATLiens. Tell me about that record, what you love about it, and kind of how you got introduced to it in the first place.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment. No, this isn't an ad read, but we do have a couple things that we'd love to share. I've been getting quite a few questions about how you can support the show. The truth is you're already doing it by listening, but if you're looking to do a little bit more, the best way is to support our show is to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Rating and reviewing truly does make all the difference for podcasts. So leave us a review, and in that review, tell us what your Pop 5 is, and we'll read it on the show. Another way to help us out is just following us on Instagram at MyPop5. Anyway, thank you again for listening, and we'll get back to the show.
So I remember very specifically, it was in 2014 was when OutKast went on their reunion tour. And it was like the first time they had performed, in 10 years or 8 years or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So it was a really big deal. I just remember one of my friends was going to see them or was going to a music festival where they were going to be performing. So he went to that music festival. He came back and we were just hanging out. He was always like, oh, you heard this song? You heard this song? And like OutKast is huge, right? So like I had heard of OutKast and my dad was always a big hip hop fan. I had heard like the hits, but
the Hey Yas, the Miss Jacksons,
exactly, yeah, those two specifically. But it wasn't until like that summer where they went on that reunion tour. So that's what I did was I went out and I bought ATLiens. That was the first CD where I was like, okay, I'm actively gonna try and get into this group. So there was already a couple things that drew me to that album. I'm a very big kind of a music nerd, so. If I hear of something or if I'm reading an article or a review and it comes up that somebody is a important figure in music, a legend, I have to know, I have to try it out. So that's kind of what I had heard over the years about Andre 3000 because I was already big into Kendrick Lamar or had been into like Childish Gambino, people who had cited Andre 3000 as being like a big influence. So that was what solidified it for me was just this curiosity and then kind of being introduced to more of the OutKast discography that I was like, okay, let me get into this more. So yeah, I think I bought ATLiens on Amazon Music or something like that. First of all, it instantly interested in the extraterrestrial aesthetic because I'm like a big like space nerd. Like I really love stories about space and I've always been interested in like those things, kind of like the Iron Giant, it's kind of like that sci-fi element that is really intriguing to me. I don't think I'd ever really heard anybody rap like that either. Just not only like the sound of his voice, but also the things that he would say. Like, yeah, it was just, after that, I went and like instantly, I was like a huge mega fan. And
Mm.
like, it's funny because I was already, you know, probably already like in college at that point. But I just remember that being like one of the most like significant musical discoveries for me. And one of the first times where I listened to an album and just immediately I was like, where has this album been my whole life? You know, it's almost like
Yeah.
it like completes me in a way. Um,
Mm.
I and I wouldn't even say that that's like my favorite OutKast album, but
Mm.
definitely significant because it was the one that I went out and bought when I decided. Because that's how I am, dude. Like I hear that this is like a really important album in the history of popular music. So I need to go and listen to it all the way through. And I maybe won't like it. I maybe will never come back to it again. But like this was one of those moments where it was like, not only do I love it, but like I need to find out more, you know? So I just
Mhm.
became like totally enamored by specifically Andre 3000's like perspective, his crippling like self-doubt like is really,
Mm.
I think, a cornerstone of who he is as a person. But yeah, that's kind of the story.
Yeah, for the audience, OutKast is an Atlanta-based rap duo featuring Big Boy and Andre 3000. As much as we're going to be standing Andre 3000, this is no slander to Big Boy. Big Boy
Right.
is holds his own,
Yes.
and this is their second album. What's very interesting, I think, about this record is some of the tonal shifts. I think in that first record, they did their best to kind of take on, I think, a similar rap persona to I think what a lot of people were doing. You know, whether it's just being braggadocious about the things that they have, and like the mo of what people think late 90s early 2000s rap was, which is just flaunting and talking about getting money and fucking people and so on and so forth, right? Not to say that that's entirely what the first one was, but I think it had more of those elements than in this record. They come out, it's their second album, they take all of these very ambitious musical decisions, both tonally from like the space sounds and the P-funk grooves, gospel feels in some aspects, right? And then also the lyricism, right? I think there's what you said, very much Andre 3000. This was a moment where in time where he was vegetarian and sober and drug free, and speaks about that. There's a couple of verses where he's really hitting on the fact that has a clear mind now and is trying not to have those types of distractions. And so it's very
Yeah.
interesting, I think, the different tonal expectations. I also think this is a record that totally catapulted them into who they are and the fame that they have, both critically and from an audience perspective. And it's kind of one of those things that I think is like very tricky, because they always say like your second record is the one that helps like kind of define who you are, right? Either like that's it or it like helps propel you. And it was such a gamble to make some of the choices that they did, and it only catapulted them to be as successful as they are. So crazy that's the experience. I'm curious too, because you're armed with hindsight, right? Having known the success and then heard back. So knowing those songs, the Hey Ya's, the Miss Jacksons, the Roses, was it weird to you like that this was the same group? Or kind of, do you remember what your perspective was when you're first listening and you're like, this is not the same shit that I've heard from them on The Love Below or any of those records,
Yes, completely. Because I think that's what made me so curious is my understanding, my perception of OutKast being those huge songs, thinking, kind of reading and being involved in like the online music community where everybody's talking about like, oh yeah, Andre 3000, he's one of the best of all time. It's like, I can't even think of an Andre 3000 verse. Like, I don't know what this guy even raps about. I don't know what he's like. I can't even picture that, So I think that was one of the reasons that I was so curious, is because just coming from like a casual listening perspective, I had no idea what to expect at all. And I also think it was like at a time where you're in your first year of college, you're really starting to kind of understand yourself very, very early on that road of like understanding yourself, but you're living your own life. You're not under your parents' roof anymore. You're just kind of figuring out how you want to live your own life. So I think that I was interested in these concepts. Like, he introduced me to a world of like politics. The way that the way he looked at the world, like, were things that I don't think I'd ever really heard of before. And to hear them and be like, whoa, like people were thinking this way. Like, this album came out the year I was born, so it's like people were thinking this way all the way back then. It's like, where have I been? Like I'm catching up slowly to like these concepts people have debated for all of mankind, politics and the drug war, the effects on marginalized communities that things like the legacy of slavery and apartheid have had. Like these were concepts that I was very, very interested in and very, very new to. So I think that those concepts in the music were like this perfect marriage between music and this whole new worldview that I had kind of just become aware of.
Do you remember a specific song or a verse or something lyrically that like really catches you when you're talking about those feelings?
Yes. Even just the first song, the first actual like song with verses, Two Dope Boys in a Cadillac, where he says, "This old sucker MC stepped up to me, challenged Andre to a battle, and I stood there patiently." Like he's just like spit and stumbled over cliches, just like that kind of stuff where it's like, oh, there at this point he's already like, I'm so beyond this. I'm so beyond the cliches of rap music, and there's already these tropes that I'm actively, maybe not even actively, like I'm just so beyond it that like everything this guy is rapping at me is like I'm beyond it. It's just cliches. So
yeah.
That was like one part where I was just like, whoa, what the hell? Kind of, I think kind of struck a chord with me about growing up. Like obviously Andre 3000 is an only child, but I think I kind of grew up feeling kind of like a bit of a loner, but not in like a sad way. I think it's just kind of, I've spent a lot of time like being into my own things and kind of living my own life. I think I resonated with that aspect of like, I'm not influenced by the world around me. I'm kind of interested in things because certain things have led me down a certain path, and in this verse he's talking about like becoming a great rapper because I wasn't around people who were just telling me I was great. I was just alone, like working on my craft. So I think that there was like an aspect of that kind of lonerism mentality that really resonated with me. Just being like the first song, I was just like, whoa, what the hell? And then like going on from there, like, yeah, I think that verse in particular is like one of the coolest Andre 3000 verses, but also just like the hook to that song and just the way that it's like just ends randomly with like the sound of a bomb when he says like,
yeah,
we just drop bombs, and then there's like an explosion and it just ends, and it's like, what the fuck is this? Like it was, yeah. So that first song is definitely like a highlight on the album for me, but also I think just one where it really just grabbed me right away.
Yeah. One of the things that I think touches on some of the attitude and intention that you're speaking about is, Big Boy has said that like one of the things that they did, like this whole record is mostly self-produced by them. They had engineers and stuff like that, but like this was them crafting this record. And one of the things that they were very intentional about is avoiding sampling. There is some samples in there, but for the most part, they tried to avoid sampling altogether. And he said something along the lines of like, if it's an old school jam, let's leave it to the old. Like we want to have our own school of music. And I think it's so cool because it totally captures that whole feeling that you're talking about of wanting to be different, and not just 100% for the sake of being different, but, because they felt that they had their own voice and being able to share that voice. And they had the freedom to be able to do that with the creation of this and have their own voice. So very, very cool.
Yeah, like I don't even think it's the best album. There are a few songs on there that I pick out and that are like obviously some of their best work. There's like a little bit of like frustration, I think, in the way that they're kind of presenting themselves, and where I think they went on to maybe be able to talk about these things in like more ways, or the themes became more complex. So there's a little bit of like a kind of like a young angst to it that I think is also, and they do have like such a tight, rather short discography, compared to a lot of other acts. But yeah, there's still reason to go back to it. And I think even if it's just like I guess I'm lucky that was the first album that I listened to as well. Like I kind of went through and like listened to everything in order because there was kind of this natural progression of things. But
yeah, and I mean, they've gone on to have such illustrious careers, both of them, but especially Andre 3000. He's been like, if you can get him on a feature, like your fucking record's going to be gold, Like
yeah.
A lot of some of my favorite work of his is when he's featuring on a track, one of my first introductions
Same.
of like, I remember one of the first like times I ever just like wanted to know a verse in a rap like that I could do over and over and over was an Andre 3000 verse, and it's on the fucking dumbest song in the world.
Is it
Do you
Kesha?
remember? No, do you remember Unk or
Yes.
UNK?
Yes.
He has a Walk It Out remix.
Oh yeah,
that
dude,
song,
it's
Walk
so
It
good.
Out, Walk It Out, and that fucking remix on that, like I can off the top of my head. I'm not gonna do it on the podcast, but I could do the whole thing right now. Though it's
Me
like so good.
too.
Like I know that one, man. It's like it's fucking the shit, you know. Like I love that verse, and like there's so many moments in that, like when he's just like, if you say real talk, I probably won't trust you. Even Jesus had 12 disciples on the lever. It's like nonsensical, but it fucking is so good. Like I'm just like, I learned it so fast, and like it's like the one that like sticks with me to this day.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one of my favorite Andre 3000 verses, because it's like he just says some of the like, yeah, like you're saying, like some of like the shit that just, how do you even think of this? You know, it's like something. It's like when we're talking about with Mike Seatown, like David Lynch writing. It's like, how do you even write this? Like that's how I feel about Andre 3000, right? Crazy. But I've always said that Andre 3000 verses to me are like, he knows exactly what he wants to say. The word that he uses is like not an obstacle for him. He always knows how to say it. He always knows how to make it rhyme. He says exactly what he wants to. And he might have to say it in a roundabout kind of weird way because of the rhyme scheme, but it's not a thing to him. Like he's going to figure out how to say it.
So Daniel, this record is clearly so important. Tell me, what are maybe some other hot tracks or favorite tracks for you that you love, for the audience to go back in and listen to?
Yes. Title track ATLiens is great. Wheels of Steel, like the first 7 tracks.
You're like, just do the whole thing top to bottom. What do we?
But really though, like the first 7 tracks on this album are like, yeah, just like one of the best runs. I mean, there's only 14, 15 songs on it, but it's like those first 7 are like stellar. So, but if I had to pick, I would say ATLiens, Wheels of Steel, Elevators, man. Elevators is so good.
I think Over the Woods is one of my favorite ones too, which is that 7th one, so that fits in your top
exactly
7, so.
Yeah, that one still too. Like there's this line where he says like, I'm here to tell you record companies act like pimps, getting paid off what we made, but we the ones that fly like blimps. Like just like stuff like that. It's like so cool, and just so, that's when they really epitomize their production style too. Like the very like clicky snares like on Elevators, where it's kind of like a rim click, and that was kind of stuff that they went on to continue doing, or even like the weird like processing on the vocals on ATLiens, where it sounds like an alien like trio of voices, you know. So they really epitomized, I think, their production style. And when I found out that they were the ones that produced the majority of the album, that I didn't even find that out until later, and I was like, how? You know, like, yeah, crazy.
All right. Well, let's go ahead. Staying in the element of space, you've mentioned it a couple times here. Let's talk about The Iron Giant. Tell me, Daniel, why do you love this movie? Why is it here on your Pop 5?
It's such a good movie, right? It was one of the first movies that I was like obsessed with when I was very, very young. Because I think the movie came out in like 1999. So I was very young. I saw it. I remember I got like this special edition VHS version of it that came with like a little Iron Giant action figure that I still remember it. But I think the sci-fi aspects of it, first of all, I think the design of the robot, like as a kid, that was just like so satisfying to me. Like the robot himself is like so cool looking, and it was like it wasn't even much more than that. But I also think there's like elements of like horror in a way, like in early on, like there's some scenes where it's like, holy shit, like this is scary. Like this is like the scenes where he's first meeting the giant and like trying to go to the forest and look for him, and then he just runs into him, and it's just like, holy shit, like the scope. Like I've always had this, there's got to be a word for it, but like the feeling of like something being so big is like kind of like a phobia for me, but like to the point where like I actively seek out things that give me like that weird feeling of like seeing like something that's so big that it's almost like incomprehensible, you know, this being that's like larger than anything you could imagine. So I think as a kid, that's what it was, is I think it freaked me out, but I think that I
You were
I
intrigued
liked
still.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
and there was the scene at the very beginning of the movie where his mom is working late, the kid, the main character, Hogarth,
Mhm.
he's like watching some shitty B movie horror flick, and there's like even just that aesthetic of like being home alone and like watching a scary movie and like eating snacks, like the aesthetics of that movie, I think, were like so crucial and kind of just
Mhm.
showing me like that's kind of where I went out and I was like, well, this is the stuff I like, and I know that I like it because I like this movie.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But yeah, even like that scene where he is watching that B movie horror flick, like I actually like sampled that in a song that I made one time. The scene where he's like talking about how there's like some brain that like they're experimenting on that turned into a monster. So yeah, I think very, very young, it was just like the aesthetic, these things that kind of scared me, that made it just enduring, Yeah. So that's what it was as a kid. From what I can kind of reflect on now, realizing like, oh yeah, that's like that was the first place I ever saw these kinds of things. The horror movie aesthetics, the questions of like war and peace, something that I can look back on now where it's like, no, I still love this movie. I love it for different reasons now, because I think it's just a genuinely good movie about xenophobia, really, is what I think is like the overall theme of the movie, but also just like really visually interesting. And for anyone that doesn't know, I'm really big into animation. Like I know I've talked about it sometimes on like our Pop 5 stuff. If I could go back, I guess I could still do it now. But if I could go back, I think I would want to get into the world of like animation and becoming an animator, because I think it's an amazing art form.
Well, there's nothing stopping you, buddy.
True.
For the audience, Iron Giant, if you haven't seen it, incredible movie, 1999 animated film by Brad Bird. Brad Bird is the creator of Incredibles, Ratatouille, very much involved with a lot of those films. It's about a giant robot in the Cold War era after, Russia sent up Sputnik into space, and a giant robot crashes down into the US, befriends a little boy named Hogarth in a small town somewhere USA. And there is this just friendship that you see between this giant, beast of a robot and this little boy. And you mentioned it, there are very xenophobic characters in the film intentionally, I think, to speak about that. But I think there's also like a lot of other themes in here that I think are very special. Some of the scenes to me that really hit me, especially on this rewatch, maybe as an adult, there's this very, very pure relationship between Hogarth and this robot. Like, and there's scenes where he's, consoling the robot after the death of a deer and teaching him about the concept of death and the concept of a soul, and telling this giant that he has a soul, and then the whole ending of, hey, the theme of this is you are who you choose to be. You don't have to be this giant killing machine. Brad Bird talks about it, and his original pitch to Warner Brothers was, what if a gun has a soul but didn't want to be a gun? And I think there's kind of moments of that where you kind of see this incredible nuance in this character, and it's such a beautiful story about that. And this little boy is like so wise, in terms of teaching this robot how to be and how to exist and some of the meanings of life. And it's so beautiful, and it's heartbreaking and funny, and there's so many great moments of this film, and I'm glad you had it on here.
Yeah, good point. I think there are scenes like that where it really doesn't shy away from being dark. Like that's one of the darkest scenes that you mentioned, about the giant being like horrified, like, and you can see it on his face, like, holy shit, like he's like, what happened? This deer that he just saw living was killed by a hunter. And then there are a lot of themes there, and I think also the BI, I think, is the guy, Mansley, the guy who's like hanging around that gets sent to the town.
It's unclear.
Some
he
kind of
just works for the
agent.
government.
Yeah, that's true. He's just like, I work for the government, so there's like, but even his character too is like, I think that there's, he is so overzealous and like very caught up in his own, not only political, but also these like very, he's like very much in it for himself. There's also kind of this interesting difference between him and the other military members at the end of the movie, where he's kind of made out to be like this coward, and the other military guys are a lot more understanding and they are a lot more honorable. So I think that there's like these complex interpretations or these complex narratives about, no, this isn't like completely anti-military either. Some of these military personnel come around to maybe accepting the fact that they were wrong or misled by this government agent who was caught up in his own fear and his own like existential dread, you know, of feeling like the whole world is going to end, like this panic. And then I think that there are some very complicated narratives that, I don't know, I think in some ways it's subversive. And I think it also kind of speaks to like my own political sentiments. Like, it's not just like, hey, war and violence is bad. But I think that it's a very mature story about some very adult themes. And I also think that the animation lends itself to making the story that much more believable, because you're not seeing like this big CGI robot. Like, everything else is animated, you know? So I think it's like one of those movies where it's like the story being told through animation is better for it, because there is no like suspension of belief when you're seeing this huge robot. The animation is still very new and fresh. I think it's aged really well. And I think the animation itself led to the movie aging as well as it has.
One of the things, though, that was distracting for me a little bit was watching it as an adult. And I believe I had seen it as a kid, but not enough to really recall anything. But the cast was so distracting to me because I could pick them out so easily. Like, I could hear Jennifer Aniston, Vin Diesel. I could not take seriously. Like, the giant. I'm like, this is just fucking Dom Toretto family, you know? Like, I'm just like fucking ready, you know, for him to bust out a Fast and Furious line, you know? And then Shooter McGavin, I don't remember his real name, I'm so sorry, actor, but Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore is that government agent. So I just imagine him doing like the stuff he does in Happy Gilmore, the way he was reacting. But the most freaking jarring moment to me is that fucker chloroformed a child in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, how did they put that in here?
That's true. And I didn't find out it was Vin Diesel until like much, much later. So I think that like that's an interesting point, because yes, the voice actors are very, very distinct and obvious, and especially seeing it like, because this was like very early on in a lot of these
99 was
careers,
before,
you know?
any of these people were almost doing anything. Like, granted, Shooter McGavin, I need to learn this guy's name. I'm so sorry, Shooter. What the hell is your name? Christopher McDonald. Sorry, Christopher McDonald. I will probably continue to refer to you as Shooter, but if anyone's wanted to know the real actor's name, Christopher McDonald is that character. But yeah, no, it was very obvious, but also he was like popular at the moment because this was post Happy Gilmore. This was like post some of the rise of Friends. So like there was some fame for some of these people. Harry Connick Jr. is Dean,
exactly.
so like it's very cool. Well, hey, I do want to kind of transition into your next thing here. Daniel, we had the chance early in the first year of this show to do our first RPOP 5, and you got to lament and be emotional with us about the breakup of this next group. Now I want to hear about the inception of your love for them. Tell me all about Daft Punk Alive 2007 and what you love about this group.
Yes, Daft Punk. This was a group that I got into similarly to something like Andre 3000 or something like OutKast. I'm just hearing everybody like, oh yeah, Daft Punk, they're legends. I'm like, okay, but why? And this was also, I think,
who is this someone? Who are you referring to here?
Well, I think that like whether I'm listening to Anthony Fantano or just reading, like at the time I was like really into like a Pitchfork. Like I would read a lot of like music journalism, participate in like music blogs or even just like on Reddit, you know? So yeah, I think that I've always been pretty involved in like the online music discussion world, just kind of hearing the name thrown out there. And then I think, well, this was also during like the EDM, like the period where EDM was like huge, you know, and kind of learning that like, oh, Daft Punk was kind of the people that took it to that level. You know, everybody wanted to be Daft Punk after Alive 2007. And that's probably why we had that era of like Deadmau5 and Skrillex and, you know, Porter Robinson, you know, like we had this huge EDM boom probably in part to Alive 2007. Yeah, it was just another one of those times where I'm reading online and I'm hearing that Daft Punk are legends and I have to go kind of figure it out, you know? And then once I did, they just kind of hit that perfect sweet spot for me. At the time, I was really getting into soul music and disco music and just kind of a lot of these classic musical movements. You know, obviously Daft Punk's music is very retrospective, is very kind of vintage, retro futurist. I think that it just kind of hit all of those right aesthetics for me at the time. And at the time they were inactive, you know, they hadn't really been doing anything. As a matter of fact, it may have also been that I was hearing about them a lot because they had just done the score for Tron Legacy. So, and then I saw them in that movie because I'm also like a big Tron fan, just like the whole, you know, sci-fi genre. So I think that may have been like one of the first places that I ever really saw them was in that movie. And then just kind of hearing about them for like the next year, I was just like, okay, I need to go figure this out. So yeah, that was my introduction. And I just went and like, you know, at the time I was still in high school, that was like pre-streaming service. So pirated all their music. And then I got lucky because then a couple years later, after I had already become like the biggest fan, they released their final album and I got to experience that, the rollout. I got to be a part of like, oh, what's coming next? So they did this like announcement at Coachella. Like I cherish those memories because I was lucky enough to have been a part of the hype.
Yeah, totally. Do you have a memory of like the first song that like hit your soul or anything like that when you're like, oh, fuck, this is it, you know?
I think the first stuff that I really got into was probably like Around the World. Like that song was just like, I think at the time it still sounded like modern enough and it was very catchy, but there was also like these like very synthesized like disco elements to it. So I think that was probably one of the first ones.
And on that record, that one transitions into Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, which is cool.
Exactly. When it comes to Alive 2007, to me, Alive 2007 is like the art of party music, DJ music. These concepts of like playing live pre-recorded music in a way that is like virtuosic. At this point, they've released 3 albums. They play this live show where they're in and out, weaving through their entire catalog up until that point, piecing it all together, mixing the vocals from this song with the good, like this random guitar line from this one part, put it over this song, like for their discography to have such a world that it exists in, like it's its own story. The whole discography is like one musical thread that can be cut and rearranged and stitched together. It's probably the album that I go back to the most because it's just like fucking euphoric. Like you're just like going from one song to another, and the transitions and the moments where like you realize that you've gone like 5 songs and they've all transitioned, and then finally they'll like end it and then start like a new section. And it's like, dude, like it's like sensory overload. There's also the fact that they never released a live DVD for it. So for the longest time, that probably led to also this mystique behind it, because the story goes that they premiered their live show. And mind you, for a electronic house music group, they had only ever toured once before that. And this was back for the first album. And then they decided that like, we don't really want to tour. That's not really the kind of group that we are. Until they kind of came up with this idea of doing this album where it would be like this huge visual spectacle. And there was like these bubblings in the live music world that like Daft Punk was planning something big. there was like an LED shortage in the world because they bought up, like at the time that nobody was doing live performances like this with so many lights, that they had like bought up all of the all of the LEDs in the world, and there was like a shortage
In the
of
world.
lighting. And so people kind of knew like, oh shit, something's happening with Daft Punk. And then they premiered this stage and performance at Coachella in 2006. And then it was like the biggest thing, and it like blew people's minds, and it's like this legendary performance. And so they went on to tour that. They were originally going to release a DVD of it. There is professional footage out there, but they decided that because this was early YouTube, like first couple years of YouTube, people were posting online, like they were seeing these videos of their performance online, of these grainy, mid 2000s cell phone footage and digital cameras, and they were like, holy shit, like this makes it even more like mythical. It's like found footage. It's like seeing a UFO. Think like even just talking about it right now, like it gives me chills, because it's like I can't even imagine like what that was like to see them in this pyramid. And I think that that's kind of the aesthetic that they were going for. These alien robots have come down to Earth for like the greatest party of all time, and then they're just gonna like disappear into the night, so this backstory, I think, is what really sells it for me. And to listen to the album, to hear, obviously the music is amazing, but then to also have this kind of playing in the background. Oh, I wonder what this looked like, and there's videos here and there, and they finally released like a Lollapalooza performance. Like somebody ended up with that footage and released it for the first time in HD, like a multicam professionally shot performance. They released that for the first time like last year. So up until last year, like nobody who had never been there had really ever seen like the full performance captured in, HD. Yeah, that's really the best way I can put it. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to me that this concept of like alien robots coming down for the craziest concert of all time and then disappearing and never performing live again, except for the 2 times they played at the Grammys. Now that I think about it,
Dang.
I think that they maybe have like the greatest to ever really do that. Put forward this image that is all that we know of them. Like we don't know what they look like. That they like graced us with, and that's that.
I mean, you could probably find it based on their names, though, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, like, yeah, I know. I'm such a huge mega fan that like I've looked up videos and footage of them at the airport and shit, because I'm a big nerd. Yeah, I think it's just like the image is a big part of it for me. And I think it's like, I can't emphasize that enough, like how big the total package is for me about Daft Punk.
Yeah, it's so awesome to hear you talk about this, just because I know how much you love them. So hearing the passion is very clear. So one that was a surprise to me here on your list is Slipknot. Okay. Tell me about your love for Slipknot. I guess the connection isn't too crazy, considering like I know recently on the show we talked about Ghost, and I know you've talked about My Chemical Romance and bands like that before. So, but this is not that. So tell me about your love for this crazy ass band that is Slipknot and why you love them.
I have to credit my aunt and my uncle for really getting me into this band. Slipknot is so significant to me. I got into them. I was in middle school at that point. They were probably like the first band that I needed to know everything about. The same way, the way that I'm talking about Daft Punk, like I think this came later, but it's very similar, like the appeal that Slipknot had for me. There was this total package, this whole image that they were putting out there that at the time, I was an angry kid. I felt like nobody understood me. I felt a lot of like aggression and anger at that age. So finding Slipknot, I remember, I'll tell this story. I got a gift card, an iTunes gift card, because my parents had just gotten me an iPod. I had an iPod Nano, the little square one. And I had just gotten an iPod Nano for the first time. And I was in 6th grade, sitting in the computer room, and I was like downloading music. And at the time, I was into stuff that like I had seen on MTV or Guitar Hero. So I'm downloading like stuff like Metallica but only like the most popular songs of all time. And
Like Enter Sandman is like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's like these very, very, it's like I'm still kind of discovering my own music taste. So my aunt comes in, and at the time, my aunt was still pretty young, probably like early 20s. So she was like, oh, you know what song you should download, or you know what song you should buy? Buy Wait and Bleed by Slipknot. It's like a song off one of the singles from their first album. So I was like, all right, yeah, I'll try it out. So I like listened to the little preview and I was like, oh yeah, this sounds cool. So I downloaded that and maybe like a couple other Slipknot songs that she told me to. That was like the first time that I had really started to listen to them. Once I actually went and started listening to these songs and she told me to download, it was like, holy shit, like this is like, I shouldn't even be listening to this. Like it felt so like, oh, like what am I getting into? But it was so dark and it was so aggressive. At the time, it was probably the craziest music I'd ever heard. Iowa didn't actually come until a little bit later, where I had borrowed my uncle's iPod. My aunt and my uncle were huge Slipknot fans, and they would tell me, "Oh, we went to fucking Ozfest, and we were seeing we were seeing people getting knocked out." And I was just like, "Dude, this is like the coolest shit." I borrowed my uncle's iPod, and then he had all the Slipknot albums. So at the time, it was like that was a big deal because I was only buying singles. I hadn't really. I didn't have my own money to buy all the CDs that I wanted to. So that's when I finally listened to Iowa all the way through for the first time. I still think it's their best record. It's their most aggressive, but it's also their most concise. I think it's just like the best track list that they've ever put out. I think the production is a step up from the first album, but not as sanitized as like the third and fourth album. There's like a happy little medium where it's still really aggressive, but there's still really catchy songs. But there's also just like some of the nastiest lyrics I had heard, at that age. So yeah, that was kind of like the discovery of it. Been a Slipknot fan ever since. And I will say too, that in the Slipknot community, that's generally considered their best album. That was I just remember that being like a very different time. I had moved away from like my hometown for a couple years, and my parents were having problems.
Where were you living?
We lived in Phoenix, Arizona for like 2 years in like late middle school, early high school. And that's when I really remember listening to Iowa and just feeling like nobody gets me, but like Slipknot gets me, and then also just like diving deep into the lore, because for anyone that doesn't know, like Slipknot is the band that wears masks. I mean, I'm sure at this point everybody knows, but Slipknot is the band.
Explain it for them. Yeah.
Slipknot is the band that wears masks. There's 9 members. They all wear a different mask. They sometimes change throughout the different album cycles, especially early on in their career. It was like they wore masks and jumpsuit. That was the outward image they portrayed. There was something that I think was also like horror adjacent to the music and the vibe. That is something that's always intrigued me. I've always been into like the dark shit. I can't even explain. Like I always go back to that time of my life and I look to it so fondly. I always check out a new Slipknot album, even though I haven't really liked their past few albums that they put out. And I think that like a lot of the shit that they say now as like 50-year-old men, like I think a lot of the shit that they say and do is like kind of corny. At the time, I thought it was a lot more edgy than it actually is. They say a lot of things that I'm kind of just like, you're not that guy. Like there's more extreme music out there, but I think that's why it was so significant. Not only was that music there for me, but it also introduced me to like the whole world of heavy music. Like it's the whole reason that I got into some of my other favorite bands, like The Devil Wears Prada or Bring Me the Horizon. Just kind of the mid 2000s, late 2000s, like metalcore scene. It's one of those bands where people are like, I wouldn't be alive without that band. Like that's how I feel about Slipknot.
Wow. I had no idea, man. That's crazy.
That is crazy. Yeah, we've never talked about it,
I'm not necessarily 100% surprised. Sorry, not that you're like obsessed with this violent fucking screaming shit. But I think it was surprising in the sense that like My Chemical Romance has been like something that I think is something that you've spoken to more heavily. And I thought that was more along that vein, more in the, not necessarily pop punk, but not as hardcore as what Slipknot is, What's very interesting to me though, and you mentioned Ozfest, and it took me back to a place where like I forget that at this time. And I'm curious, we both grew up in New Mexico, and New Mexico's influence in music, like the types of concerts that come through there, it's only country shows, it's only Hispanic New Mexican music, or it's fucking metal and classic rock bands. Like those are the only people that ever go into New Mexico. So a lot of the culture there only listens to fucking classic rock and like this band from that time, like Disturbed, Slipknot, Korn, those types of bands that were kind of going through that era, So like when you said Ozfest, like I totally forgot that thing friggin' existed, but it was like these bands doing this type of shit. I had a cousin who was obsessed with that era of stuff. And I remember like he and I were really, really close, and I would like sleep over at his house. I'd play video games all night or whatever. But this fool couldn't sleep without having the radio on.
Yeah.
And he would listen to fucking Slipknot and Disturbed and shit. And I'm like fucking laying there at like 8 years old, just, and this, I will slit your throat. And, some of these lyrics, I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? It's like, I'm laying in bed, like just trying to sleep. And so like my only memories are like just dozing in and out of sleep, like hearing just fucking Slipknot, Disturbed, and then like Buck and Dex coming on for the morning show. Like, so it's just like such a visceral thing. So when you said Slipknot, I was personally never into this band, but I do have that visceral memory of just that, like trying to sleep as a kid, our culture, our hometown of kind of being obsessed with this core of music, and just how visceral it was.
That's true. That is a big part of the New Mexican live music circuit. They always go to El Paso, which is 45 minutes away from my hometown. So it's like, and that's actually the first concert I ever went to. My aunt and my uncle took me to a Slipknot concert, when I was in middle school, and that was in El Paso. And it was like huge, it was like in the Coliseum, like it's a fucking think maybe even something that I've taken for granted because I never even really thought, because it's like these are the bands that I like, like I went to go see Slipknot in Albuquerque like a couple times. I was just happy because it's like, oh shit, Slipknot's coming. I can just go to that on a Wednesday night,
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, sorry, I brought up that statement that it's very popular in New Mexico because I'm also curious, like, I don't know if if it's popular here in California or, some of these other places. Like, obviously they're popular. It wasn't like they were New Mexico bands, but I mean, like, the type of popularity that it had, like, everyone loved that type of music where we were living. I don't know how much that translated to this other thing. So, audience, if you also were into these bands, please let us know because I honestly have no clue.
Yeah, but I also think that was like a time where a lot of the people that I was friends with and people at my school, that like wasn't what people my age were listening to, because I think like the popular music at the time was stuff like My Chemical Romance, or even like bands like The Devil Wears Prada, where it was like more on like the Warped Tour kind of side of things. Like that was like a big thing in Las Cruces, was like, because that was the
that's
only
where it
festival
was.
That ever
yeah,
came
that
to
was the
us.
festival that ever came to New Mexico, and it was in your hometown, not mine. So like I had two big trips. Like my coming of age stories were making trips that my parents didn't know I was going to go to Warped Tour.
So I think that there was a little bit of like to me that was like pretty out there. Like listening to Slipknot was like not really something at least that people my age were listening to. Yeah, man. Slipknot. It was like, that was my whole thing. My dad, like, because I would wear so many Slipknot shirts and that was like all I ever wore. My dad would always just call me Slipknot. Like every time I'd be like, anytime I'd walk up to me or something. I know I have yet to find any pictures of me wearing a Slipknot shirt from that era. But it's funny because even just recently I was like, I'm on the hunt for like a Slipknot shirt because for some reason, as you get older and then you just kind of get rid of clothes that have a bunch of holes in them and shit. So it's like I need to get a good Slipknot shirt. So I'm on the hunt for one right now. That was my whole thing in middle school.
Well, let's go ahead and get on your last one here. I know I'm keeping you a little over time here, but Kingdom Hearts 2. Tell me all about that game. Tell me what you love about it. It's clear you just had a big reaction about it. Tell me about what you love about this game.
Kingdom Hearts 2 is a game that I play like once a year.
Wow.
For anyone that doesn't know, Kingdom Hearts it's a video game series. It started in like 2002, and it is the combination of Final Fantasy and Disney. So it was created by Tetsuya Nomura, who's a guy who had been a big part of like the Final Fantasy games, and they gave him the green light to work on a new project where he wanted to mix it with Disney. I remember the reason that I played the first game was because on the back of the game was a picture of Jack Skellington. And I was like, oh shit, Jack Skellington's in this game. One of my friends had it. He lived on like the same street, and we would always like exchange games and like play video games together. So he had it, and he was like, yeah, I don't know, I don't really play it, like I didn't really get into it. I took it home, and it was like, at the time I was in like elementary school, I was probably in like 3rd or 4th grade. I did not understand what was going on. Those games are like, they're very story heavy, and there's a lot of reading. If you're not actually like invested, like it can be hard. It takes a lot out of the player to get into it. Funny story is, when I was in 5th grade, there was a girl named Alyssa that I had the hugest crush on. And for Halloween, she dressed up as a character from Kingdom Hearts, and she was like really into Kingdom Hearts. So I was like, yeah, I'm into Kingdom Hearts, you know? So that like became my whole thing, because I had like such a big crush on this girl. And then at that point I was like, well, now I have to play the game, you know? So now I had a reason to like get into it. But then I actually really liked it. By the end of the year, I didn't really even talk to that girl anymore. But it was like, I was so into this game series. So there was Kingdom Hearts 1 on PS2, Kingdom Hearts side entry that came out on Game Boy Advance that I had and was obsessed with. And then Kingdom Hearts 2 came out like right before summer vacation, 5th grade. So I was like, it was like this really like big time in my life where it was like end of 5th grade. I was like going to middle school, and there was like this big lead up to Kingdom Hearts 2 where like I remember going into GameStop one day and they were like, did you hear? Like Kingdom Hearts 2 was just announced, and I was with my dad, and like he didn't tell me, but he pre-ordered the game and the strategy guide for me, because that was like a time when like strategy guides are big. So like, you know, I would always be like bringing it up like, oh, Kingdom Hearts 2 is going to come out. Kingdom Hearts 2 is going to come out. One day, my dad picked me up from school and just like, boom, like pulled out like the game and the strategy guide. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, it's like a huge moment for me, because like I didn't know, you know, I had no clue. So like I went home and like played it for like hours. Like I remember he was like, you can stay up late tonight, son, you know, you know, it's just like, yeah, let's go. So yeah, it was probably like the first time I was really, really into a game like that, and like was there for like the, you know, the whole hype train of like the new game coming out. So just like really, really nostalgic, good memories for me. And then I remember like that weekend, like I went to stay at my friend's house. He had like this huge house with like this big home theater. And so like his parents let us like set up the PS2 in there, and we like played like all night. Like it was so cool. Like I look back on that so fondly, because it was just like, those games are like long and there's a lot to do in them. At that age, you know, it took me probably months to finish that game. That was probably the first game that I ever played where like I would play it all over again, you know, no matter what, no matter if it's like 40 hours to get through the game. It's like, I do that regularly, you know, I play it all the way through. Leading up to us, like I just started it again. It just came out on Switch. There's been a lot of controversy because they're like streaming versions. You can't actually download them to your Switch. You have to like connect to a server. So there's been a lot of controversy about that. But being able to play it like in handheld mode, sitting down on the couch, is like so cool. So I had to get it that way. But yeah, as you can tell, like it was like one of the most fun, most memorable experiences of like having a game, and like something that is like also like super emotional. Like I love the characters. It made me feel things that I don't think I had ever felt before, you know? Like I had this idea of like going on this long journey and like losing contact with your friends, having to go and like save the world, but like there's a cost involved with that. That still means a lot to me, you know?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with it at all?
Very acutely. What I was going to ask you though is, what I do understand is, you know, a lot of the levels are very Disney theme based, where it's like Lion King or Aladdin or Steamboat Willie. Do you have a favorite level, or like one that you love to be in that world?
In Kingdom Hearts 2, so Halloween Town comes back. Kingdom Hearts 1, you got to go to Halloween Town, but in Kingdom Hearts 2, you get to go to Halloween Town and you get to go to Christmas Town. So you can go to either or. So I think like Disney wise, it's either that one or the Mulan world. Kingdom Hearts 2 notoriously has like this really long intro that like doesn't make sense at first, and it's really confusing. It's like a 2-hour intro to the game where you're playing as a character that's not even the main character, and you're like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh wow.
But like
It's Donald Duck.
Oh man. That was really good. And then you find out after like this really long 2-hour intro, like you finally come back to your character, and you find out that this character you've been playing as is kind of like a ghost, like a shell of your character. It is really funny because there's like in the Kingdom Hearts community, there's a lot of jokes about Donald just because he's, such a shithead, like notoriously. But yeah, so it has this long intro, you finally get to the end of it, and then you're finally introduced to your character. And then you get the choice to go to a couple of worlds. And the first few worlds are China for Mulan, Beast Castle for Beauty and the Beast, and then Olympus Coliseum for Hercules. So the first one I went to the first time I played it was to China for Mulan. So that holds like a lot of nostalgia for me. So either Nightmare Before Christmas or Mulan are really good.
Nice. Well, Daniel, we will get you out of here. But before we do, you know how this goes. We got 5 rapid fire questions to close out the episode, okay? So, yes. Mr. Daniel, if you could be on a reality TV show, which one would you choose?
Put me
you
on.
You got to
next.
know this fucking question is coming, man. Ask it every episode.
I did. Okay. Put me on next.
Next, okay.
Because that counts,
are you getting nexted when you stop off the bus, Daniel? Or you think you make it a little farther?
I think I'm getting nexted as soon as I step off the bus, but I think that I'm gonna say something really spicy in retort. Like I'm gonna step off the bus wearing like cargo shorts and flip flops, and they're gonna be like next, and then I'm gonna be like, you couldn't handle this anyway, or like something like that,
Yeah.
Like I would have like a crazy retort.
I think I'm getting nexted like before, like she just hears me take a step. I'm not even off the bus yet, and she's like, "No, I don't even want to see this dude. I hear from the way he walks, it ain't gonna work." Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Not very rapid fire, but here we go. If people have never consumed any of your pop 5, what's the one that you'd want them to go experience right now?
Daft Punk, Alive 2007.
Awesome. All right. I'm not gonna let you forget this one. You totally left this up your pop 5, and I think it's because you were shameful about it. But this absolutely should have been on your pop 5. What is your favorite SpongeBob episode, Daniel?
Ooh. Oh, shit. I was not expecting this question. It's gotta be maybe the hash slinging slasher is a good one. It's either between that one or the Halloween one where SpongeBob shaves off all of his sponge and he's just a brain.
Oh yeah.
His like ghost costume.
For the audience, Daniel should have had this on his pop 5 because I don't think we hang out more than once without him being like, "Hey, you remember that one episode of SpongeBob?" So there's just no way. It's just a fallacy that this is not number 1 on his top pop 5. But all right. If you could talk to Fantano, who should have also been on your pop 5 here, Daniel, about any album or song, what would you want to talk to him about?
Actually, that's a good question. Right now, I've been never been like a big Iron Maiden fan, but like the past couple of weeks, I've been really getting into them for some reason. So right now, and it would probably change like every 30 minutes you ask me this question because I would love to talk to Fantano someday. But right now, I would probably ask him his opinion on the album Power Slave by Iron Maiden, just because I think that that's like the one that I've been digging on the most. Fun fact about Fantano that I don't know if I've ever told you. I had a friend who graduated the year before me and went to Wesleyan University. And she met and became like acquaintances with Fantano because at the time I think that he would do like these panels in that area, like the northeast section of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so she became like friends with him. And I had this little band in high school, and like we weren't very good, but we were very ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
One day we asked her if she would like
No way.
have him listen to like some of our recorded music,
Uh,
and he did. And he said
Wow.
um just seems like kind of like generic, like jazzy funk rock, but like, yeah, it's not really doing anything for me. But like, so he wasn't really into it. And it's like, I'm not even mad at the fact that
Yeah.
like he didn't like it, because and especially now, it's like, even at the time, it's like, I wasn't the one who initiated that. Like, it was somebody else in the band who was like, dude, you should get him to listen to it. And I was like, he's not going to like it.
Mhm.
And he didn't. But the fact that he's listened to and commented on something that I've played on before is really cool.
That's pretty fucking sick. That's
Yeah.
pretty sick. All right. Last question, Daniel. What advice would you give a past version of yourself?
Let shit go. Just take a walk. Don't say or do that thing that you're thinking about doing. Just take a deep breath, let it go, and move on.
In the words of Queen Elsa, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to tell you,
go.
Daniel, you win the award for the most non-rapid fire segment of this show.
Yeah.
You know this comes every episode, and yeah, it's all right because the stories were excellent. Buddy, thank you so much. Obviously, I love the shit out of you. I love making this show with you. I'm so excited to continue to make more and more. But before we go, anything you want to promote, or where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram. That's the only social media that I'm on. Anything to promote? I've put out some songs, just little fun little projects that we can link you to. But yeah, other than that, likewise, Ryan. Look forward to you could catch me on my Pot 5. Look forward to doing this more. This was really fun.
Hell yeah, brother. All right, I love you, man. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
You, bud. See you soon.
That'll do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. Daniel's not going anywhere, so you'll be able to hear all of his updates. Any new tunes that he releases, we'll be sure to share those. Otherwise, you can support us, support the podcast. The best way to do that is to rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on our socials at MyPop5, or share your favorite episode with a friend and let us know when you do. We'll see you next time, but until then, what's your Pot 5?